Hello and welcome back for another presentation in your World Regional Geography course. This time we're going to introduce the realm of South America. So let's begin. So South America has a wide diversity of physical landscapes, from the high Andes Mountains to the tropical rainforests of the Amazon. Aside from fertile lands, other resources are in abundance, such as copper in Chile. Pre-European colonialism, most of the groups organized themselves in states or empires. The Inca was the largest in existence when the Europeans arrived. Plantation-style agriculture was popular in the region, and even after the abolishment of slavery, indentured servants were brought in from Asia to support the labor base. We can also introduce the values and ideas of core versus hinterland, where you find that majority of your population will bulk around and live in a core periphery zone. And then you have the hinterland, which is kind of the outliers. And we find that most of your hinterland areas are going to be somewhere around actually in the middle of the continent itself. Now, as stated before, the physical geography is incredible in South America. You have the Andes Mountains, which is the longest mountain chain in the world, and has at least 30 mountain peaks over 30,000 feet in elevation. You also have the Amazon River, which has the greatest discharge of any river in the world and carries about 1/5 of the world's fresh water. Although it's not the longest river in the world, it is assumed that it could be based on prehistoric and ancient meanders, scars, and remnants of the river was, and so there is some discussion about whether it truly has been ever the longest river in the world. Now, Spain colonized the western part of South America, and Portugal colonized the eastern coast of what is present-day Brazil. The only region that was not colonized by these two powers was a very, very small region in the north portion of the continent, the Guianas, which was colonized by Great Britain, the Netherlands, and France. So this diagram that I'm sharing here just kind of puts it in perspective of the areas in which it was colonized. As you can see that there is a line here, but nonetheless they're just showing where the Portuguese had entered, the Spanish, and then you have Britain, Dutch, and French at this very small area in the top. Now, South America can be divided into 5 main cultural realms or areas. The first one is the tropical plantation, which is located right along here on the rim, Brazil and a little bit farther north. It resembles the Caribbean rimland in its culture and economic activity. It's also very tropical within its climate. You also have the rural Amerindian, which is this red zone right here. One of the poorest regions, but extraction of gold and silver gold and silver will empower the elites. It's considered highlands, very dry, high altitude. You also have the Amazon Basin, which as development has encroached upon the region in the forms of deforestation, mining, and cattle ranching. It's also very warm and humid. You also have the mixed mestizo region, which is this greater light green zone that, almost a majority of the continent itself. It's a region between the tropical plantation region and the rural Amerindian region. It includes a majority of the people who share a mixed European and or Amerindian ethnicity. And then last is the European commercial, which is the complete southern tip, or known as the southern cone. Very fertile soils, European trade provided early economic growth, and the region attracted industry and manufacturing in later decades of the 20th century. So let's introduce again our dot density map of population as well as our relief. So let's talk about the dot density for a moment. So in this case, we can see, unlike when we looked at Central America and Mexico, the population is not really focused on the central part. It's actually on the peripheral, right, along the outer edges. And a major reason for that is because it's close to waterways for import and export goods. And that's where your largest cities are. We also know, which is interesting, because we say that there is some population along the western margin, but look at how tall those mountainscapes are. So that just really speaks to how limited population would be in places such as the central Amazon realm. moving forward, let's break this a little bit into smaller pieces. So Venezuela is the home of Angel Falls, which was used in a popular Disney Pixar film. It is the tallest waterfall in the world, over 2,640 feet of unbroken water. Nearly 90% of this population in Venezuela lives in an urban area. Agriculture is not really their strength, so imports are completely necessary for their survival. But 90% of their export earnings are from oil, and they actually are, with the amount of exports that they have, they do compete with the US, Canada, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria. Now, politics in Venezuela often plays the wealthy elites against the poor majority. President Chavez has not been an exception to this. Chavez has supported socialist political leaders from other Latin America states and has pushed a globalization agenda along those same lines. Then looking just a little southwestward into Colombia. So the three ranges of the Andes Mountains run from north-south through Colombia, which is larger than most of the southeastern states in the U.S. Colombia has two legal exports, which are coffee and oil. Colombia has ideal conditions for growing coffee and was once the world's largest coffee producer. Now, Brazil and Vietnam both produce more than Colombia. The U.S. is also the largest consumer of these products, so they export a majority of their products to the United States. In the past century, parts of Colombia have experienced about a 1 degree Celsius average temperature increase and up to 25% increase in precipitation, which is, the result of climate change. And the concern is that if the temperatures continue to increase, and precipitation continues to increase, that they will not be a susceptible area or a proper area to grow their agriculture, looking specifically at coffee and some of their illegal crops. Paraguay is a landlocked country between the Andes and the Atlantic coast. It is a very poor nation with very few opportunities to advance within its standard living. Now, because of Colombia's tropical climate, it has many remote areas and contributes to its development of the major coca growing season, not cacao, coca, which is the leaf that they use to produce cocaine. By the 1970s, extensive drug smuggling had developed, and powerful drug cartels became major political brokers within the country. And since then, there has been a constant struggle between the cartels and governments. Now let's look at Brazil. Brazil is the largest country in South America. And in colonial times, Brazil was part of the Atlantic Trade Triangle, which functioned as a transportation conveyor moving goods and people around the regions bordering the Atlantic Ocean. Manufactured trinkets were sent to Africa from Europe, slaves were sent to the Americas, and plantation products and rum was then sent back to Europe, which would essentially be bringing in that triangle shape. The Atlantic slave trade was responsible for bringing 10 million African slaves to the Americas. Brazil received the largest number of these slaves. Brazil is an urban country. Approximately 87% of Brazil's population lives in an urban area. Urbanization seldom eliminates poverty. Brazil is an emerging power in the world marketplace, but still has a huge low-income presence. Brazil has the largest economy in South America and is a parallel force with the United States in the Northern Hemisphere. The country has urbanized and industrialized to compete with the global economic core areas in many ways, and Brazil is among the 10 largest economies in the world between agriculture, coffee, and they're one of the greatest producers of orange juice, and etc. So looking at these two maps on the right hand side, the top one shows the different realms of looking specifically at their climate. So you can see your tropical rainforest of Brazil, then you have your cerrado, your savanna, then you have the thorny scrubs, plantation style down in this area here, periodically wetlands, and then down here is your tropical semi-deciduous forest, and then the grasslands. And then if we look at this map and compare it here to the population density, we see that a majority of the people live in the southeast region. You have then the second majority being in the northeast, and then then it's kind of split throughout the south, north, and west margins of Brazil. Now, deforestation has reduced the habitat critical to the survival of native species. An estimated 50% of the Earth's species live in the tropical rainforests, which only cover about 5% of the Earth's surface. Now, these development patterns have caused extensive deforestation of the tropical rainforest. What would they be? Well, agriculture, logging, mining, and also looking at livestock and for meats. The forest has many layers for habitats to survive. Soils in the tropics are extremely low in nutrients, which have been leached out by the abundant rainfall. Mind you, it rains on average 200 inches of rain per year in a rainforest. The nutrients are on the surface of the layer, part of the O horizon, and those are from fresh falling leaves and branches and debris that are decomposing on the floor itself. So when we talk about just even soil horizons, looking at the diagram on the right, the topmost layer is called the O horizon. Those are your fresh organics. That's going to be very rich with nutrients. So technically, by having all of this, these layers, all of this forest, it actually kind of protects those rich nutrients from being washed away. But if by deforesting these regions, you then allow additional rainfall to not just hit the leaves and kind of drip its way down, it impacts the soil, which can then also move that organic material and or burn it and then remove it, and you essentially just have clay soil, which is not very producible of material in agriculture. Usually get about one growing season. So what they'll do is they'll slash and burn, maybe grow a crop, then grow a hay or an alfalfa for their livestock, and then after that the soil is pretty much sterile. It's not going to be able to produce anything. We mentioned the triangle. I did want to throw this up here. It is made reference in the book of the Atlantic Trade Triangle, of how it going from Europe to Africa, South America, North America, and back. And this really goes beyond just looking at the slave triangle, as it's often referred to, but with just how people were able to move back and forth. Moving forward, looking at the Southern Cone, agriculture has been a major focus from this region's earliest development, but a large percentage of the population today is actually urbanized, which is why the Southern Cone has the highest incomes and standard living than most parts of South America. The Southern Cone is a European commercial area, and more than 85% of the population is of European ancestry. There are few Amerindian minorities or immigrants from Africa or Asia in the Southern Cone. Most of your diversity comes farther northeast within South America. Now, the climate is due to the rain shadow effect. In northern Chile and Atacama region, prevailing winds reaching northern Chile from the east and hit the Andes mountain chain, from which are the highest mountains on the continent. The height of the Andes causes any moisture from rain clouds to precipitate on the eastern slope. Patagonia is the largest expanse of the South that is semi-arid because of the rain shadow effect. The area possesses enormous natural resources, including large amounts of oil and natural gas, gold, silver, copper, coal. Many other things can be found there. Also, livestock is very important to the livelihood of Patagonia, which is otherwise sparsely populated. So obviously people are outpopulated by their livestock. But that idea of the rain shadow effect is that when you have a prevailing wind, when it moves that moisture across, when it hits the mountain, as it moves upward, it gets colder in our atmosphere, and it causes that moisture to condense and to precipitate, then leaving when the cloud finally does breach the brisk of that mountain or that range. It leaves it very dry on the opposite side. So as we can see here, the prevailing winds coming across rains on the Argentina side and is very dry on the Atacama side, right here in the desert, and then vice versa down here. As we can see that there's some moisture that comes off of the Pacific, hits the Andes, and keeps it somewhat dry on the Patagonia side. The Atacama Desert, to put that in perspective also, it's not uncommon for them to receive an equivalent in precipitation to the thickness of a hair. So it can be very limited precipitation that they will receive in that realm. So let's kind of put that together. So let's test it. Here's some questions. The longest mountains in the world are found in South America. They are called the what? During European colonialism, who colonized Brazil? During European colonialism, who colonized the western margin? Overall, the majority of the population in South America live within the interior, or are they along the coastal regions? So before I show the answers, don't forget to click like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet, and be sure to check out some of the other videos. And let's move forward. So the longest mountains are the Andes. During Europe colonialism, the Portuguese actually colonized Brazil. Also during the European colonialism, who colonized the western margin, it would have been Spain. And lastly, overall, the majority of the population in South America live within the coastal region along that perimeter. Very different from when we looked at both Central America and Mexico, looking specifically at where populations densify, where do they live. And then we find that in South America, it's along the peripheral, what we consider the coastal regions. And we also kind of acknowledged, again, it's also because of trade and things like that that it happened. You know, we have to remember that in many cases, some of these civilizations and empires that were once relevant and built and prevalent, people don't move. They stay there. They stay generation after generation. So you don't have this big migration of people into other areas because resources aren't readily available. Unlike places like in the United States where we're able to do that, we can move off the grid because the grid will follow us in a sense. Anyway, hope that was helpful for part of your piece here. And don't forget to click like and subscribe. And we'll talk soon.